Thank you everyone for joining. I'm Tyson, the founder and CEO of OnTrajectory. I'm joined today with somebody from the OnTrajectory team, Andrew. He's going to be helping me read out the questions and make sure that if folks come in late, they get admitted as they enter. And I'm just going to kick this off. I'm just happy that everyone's here. I'm happy that folks are interested and have questions, and I'm hoping to really narrowly answer your questions in a very efficient way. What I would like everyone to do, so I know that in the invite, a lot of folks, it asked you for what kind of questions you might have had ahead of time. We do have all them, we've collected all of them, but to make sure that I'm not answering questions for folks that didn't end up joining, if you can put your question in the chat log, and then we're going to read them out and answer them. If for whatever reason the chat log is exhausted, we'll go back to those collected questions, and then afterward, we're also going to answer any unanswered questions so that everyone's questions do get answered. Yeah, so that's it. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So for folks that have been using OnTrajectory for a while, you know that we have a new user interface. It is designed, it actually is purposefully designed to make your lives better, even though some folks might disagree. And we have heard from folks that are not necessarily pleased with certain changes, and we have absolutely listened, and we've added options to return things to their normal position. And that's what I'm going to discuss today, is the general layout and what we've done to sort of synchronize the old UI and the new UI. All right, so let's get started. One of the things that we heard from a lot of folks is that we used to have a middle bar here that had the retirement age and the trajectory end age and the base inflation rate. And we moved that because, so part of the reason for the redesign of the interface was that it was very overwhelming for new folks when they were first getting started. And we recognized the need to kind of bring people into OnTrajectory's full capabilities at a slower pace than what the current or what the old user experience was. You answer 4 questions, you get plopped into the middle of this screen with like information everywhere, and it was overloading for some people. But obviously folks that have used the tool for a while, they're used to where things are, they like where things are, and so it felt like you were losing functionality when we first released the new user interface. We have reached out to everyone that, so folks that are coming from the old interface, they have this button to return. We've reached out to everyone, both that's tried the new user interface and returned to the old one to find out exactly, what it is that they were feeling and what changes we needed to make. And we've collected your feedback, and I want to show you some of the things that we've implemented based on that feedback. So by and large, the 2 interfaces are identical in their layout. The chart up top, the data on the bottom, some other information here on the right side. So the middle bar that I was just discussing is gone, but folks didn't like that. And what we've done is we've added the ability to return it. So those 3 basic settings, your retirement age, the trajectory end age, and the base inflation rate, they live over here, but you can return them now by clicking on display basic settings below graph. So now it's just like it was before with that bar, and also the ability to launch the output data as well, which was in the old user interface. Another thing that we've heard is that a lot of folks felt like screen real estate was cut down with your ability to see if you have a lot of accounts or expenses or income streams, that it was more difficult to see that list. So we've added something called the compact view, which returns it to a state where these rows are now much tighter, just like they are in the classic interface, and some of the spacing is tightened up here as well. So now it's returning it to basically the same visibility as the old interface had. So those 2 options now exist, and I'm hoping that is really helpful for people. Some other things that we've added. So before, you've always had the ability to minimize the chart and return it, or maximize the chart and return it. That's always existed. But what we've added is some user definable ways to manipulate the interface. So we've got this slider here. So if you just want it a little bit bigger, but not huge, you can do that manually. And that's going to be remembered between sessions. So when you log back in again, it's going to remember that sizing and give it back to you. If you want to return it to the original sizing, just double click on the icon and it returns to the factory setting. Same thing over here. So if you just want to make this data a little bit wider, and again, I'm looking at this on a nice big monitor, so I can easily see all my data when it's in the factory position. But if it's, depending on your screen size, you might want to do this. And again, we're going to remember this in between sessions so that it returns. And if you want to go back to the normal, you just double click it and it returns to the normal size. So compact view, returning of the middle bar, the ability to resize items independently. I think that solves a lot of the problems that folks were having. And I hope that folks will enjoy using the new user interface. Oh, another feature. A lot of people just got annoyed. So this tooltip is really helpful if you're trying to look at different points on the graph and see the date and the age and information about what's being displayed. But it can be a little bit annoying. So we can just toggle that off really easily. Chart tooltip, toggle off, and now it's gone. So that's another thing we've added. All right. Then, now, on to your questions, because that's why we're here, to answer everyone's questions about OnTrajectory. As I said, we're joined by Andrew, a gentleman on the OnTrajectory team. And so what I'll ask is, Andrew, if you want to read out the first question, and I'll go ahead and answer it.
Yeah, so the first question we've got is around modeling current volatile inflation percentages and stock market bumps. So how do we actually start interacting, I think, with what we're seeing in the market?
Awesome question. And in fact, we have actually added new features to the tool just because of the current situation. So you've always had the ability to put a central inflation rate. And just so I explain to everyone, the way inflation works in OnTrajectory is it's automatically applied to expenses, also to income, and also to contributions. Now you can manually override any of that, but if you don't manually override it, it's going to be whatever this rate is. But we're experiencing right now twice or three times the inflation that we've had for the past 10, I don't know, maybe 20 years. And we don't, most economists do believe that it's not, what was the term they were using initially was, I forget.
Transitory.
Transitory, right. So it's no longer transitory, but it's not permanent either. So we'll call it, we're calling it temporary. So we have the ability now to set a temporary inflation rate for a certain number of years so that you don't have to go in on every single income or expense item and override it and create age ranges and all that. So we can do it centrally. So you click here on inflation rate, set what you think the temporary rate is. So we're burning almost at 7%, right? So let's say 7% for 1 year. What's that going to do to my model? And I can see that was a really big change. Let me share that again. So it was, the end result on this was $94,000 at age 90. When I set the temporary inflation rate of 7% for 1 year, it took $50,000 off my end number. So that's a real impact. Now I need to also point something out though, and this is critical. With the temporary rate, we're only doing it against expenses. So what we're assuming is that expenses are rising at this new rate, and then they sort of get pegged there, and then old inflation rate takes over. But we're not increasing income and contributions, which is probably more conservative than we need to be. But if we did it the other way and we increased income at the same rate, that's probably not correct either, because yes, incomes are rising, but not at the same speed. So we've chosen to be a little bit more conservative and putting only in expenses. Now, if we did 2 years, for example, now this person's in negative territory, negative 38,000. So this is real. It's very real. But I want to actually point something out. I wrote an article on this a couple of weeks ago, well, last month, I guess, modeling the real impact of an inflation spike. And what I do is I go through and do kind of just what I showed you. I do, I took a baseline scenario. I modeled 7% for 1 year, 7% for 2 years, but then I put some perspective around everything. So if folks are interested, I would point you to this article. Obviously, I think it's worthwhile, but I wrote it, so there's that. But you can play around with that. So, and then what happens is after that 2 years, it's going to return to the normal rate. And we put a little temp indicator here so that you can see that there is a temporary, that it's not actually 3%, it's 7% for 2 years. All right.
Let me ask one quick question. Can you do half percentages, or is it only whole numbers?
It's not, yes, you can. So you can do 6.5 for 1 year.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right, let me pull up another question. What's the best way to model stock grants that are vesting annually? That's
wow.
From Arthur.
Well, yeah, we're jumping into the deep end. Good. All right. Stock grants that are vesting annually. So, I mean, my first reaction would be to model it as an account with contributions that match the vesting, but the contributions do not come from your income. So let me demonstrate how to do that. So let's say I'm going to do this as an account. So I'm on the Accounts tab, Add Item, and I'm just going to choose Other Account. So let's call this Stock Grants. And if that stock that has vested, so if you've got stock that's already vested, you can go ahead and put that here, say 20 grand. And if it's, put whatever growth rate you feel is correct. And then from a contributions perspective, however much is vesting each year, let's say $5,000 is vesting each year. But now here's the trick. If we just did that, because it's a contribution, it would say, oh, I need to pull, $5,000 either from income or someplace else to make this contribution. But we have an option called unfunded contributions. So if you choose receives unfunded contributions, now that $5,000 is going to go into it automatically and not draw from your funds. The only other thing I would mention too is that because you're probably going to pay, well, are you paying taxes on those when you get the grant or when you sell them? Well, I think depends on your situation. But if you're paying the taxes on them right away, then you could choose tax deferred as your handling. If you're paying if you're paying tax on right away, you could use tax annual, or you could use because if you get more gains, you have to pay taxes on the gains later. So tax deferred gains only, or tax annual, or deferred, then it's deferred. But all I'm pointing at is based on how taxes are being handled, you want to choose the correct tax handling. I will also mention that if you choose tax annual, then you have the ability to put a dividend yield on it as well.
Arthur.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say Arthur said he's talking about paying taxes when they vest, yes, and then gains come at the time of selling.
Yep. So then, you would choose tax deferred gains only in that case. All right.
Perfect. All right. So how about, should the growth percentage for each account reflect projected, nominal, or real returns?
It should. Okay. So we do everything in today's dollars. We automatically add inflation when you're looking at your return, when you're looking at your balances in the future, you're looking in today's dollar. So let's say, for example, we have this set at 4.5%, stock grants at 4.5%. This number out here, this 405,000, is in today's dollars. So from that perspective, inflation is being applied. So because that's true, you don't need to subtract inflation from your growth percentage. So go ahead and put in what you expect the real return to be. Now, one thing I'll point out though is that a lot of times people, let's say I'm expecting 6 or 7%, let's say, but I don't want to put that in my plan. So a lot of times what I'll suggest folks, so when I do this is the way I use OnTrajectory as well. So I create an age range, and you have to do this for every account, but accounts that have like sizable balances. I create an age range, one of which reflects the past up into the current, and then another one for the future. So let's say for example, I started this at 42, I'm now 45. So I would create one age range from 42 to 45. I would go back, I actually do this. I go back and look at what my returns were in that account during that period. So let's say they were 7%. And then I create another age range from 46. In this case, this is, I'm going out to retirement on this one. And then I'm going from retirement out to my end age. And the reason I'm doing that is because, folks will often shift their investments to a bond-heavy portfolio during retirement, more conservative. So now what I've done is I've got my 7% that I achieved in the past, and then I've got my 4.5 or 5 or 5.5, whatever I'm choosing for my accumulation period. And then, during retirement, 3 or 2.5 or 3.5 or whatever you want to choose for that. And then what I do is every year that goes by, I just click this end range. When I turn 46, when I did turn 46, I click it up, and then I go back and I look at this. Oh, actually my portfolio achieved 7.5% during that time period. And so this is great because what it does is it keeps cohesion between the calculated balance and your actual progress, but it doesn't force you to assume that the future is going to be like the past.
I think that's a great, just kind of as a side note, one of the values of coming back and utilizing the tool regularly. We have some people who jump in and set some stuff to look at, and then we have others who reuse the tool regularly. That's a great example of how you can really utilize the tool on a regular basis to get a clear picture. Okay, so here's a question from Rick. I'd like to learn more about how the default account works. Specifically, it appears that the full amount of distributions from tax-deferred accounts flows into the default account versus the distribution minus tax. And he's wondering if this is correct. And maybe this is kind of a broader question because Tyler chimed in on this and said, hey, I've also noticed some strange behavior with how funds move between default accounts and other accounts. So can you just give a general overview of how the default account works, maybe, and then in relation to some other specific accounts?
Sure. So the default account is just the spot where money ends up if we haven't indicated that the money should go somewhere else. And the question is absolutely correct about RMD or distributions from tax deferred accounts. That's the money goes to the default account. It basically becomes part of your cash flow, but it goes in less the taxes. So the full distribution occurs, and then the tax, and then basically what we're simulating is the full distribution occurring, the money going into your default account, but then the taxes also coming out. It all happens at one time. So the money that's going in is less the taxes. Now there are some situations where that's not true, because the taxes that are owed are in excess of what you have in the account. So let's say, for example, you take a distribution from an account. Like let's say you tell the system to take a distribution from an account, and it's a tax deferred account. So let's do this. So let's have a tax deferred account. Let's just say traditional IRA, and it starts out with $10,000. And then I decide to model a distribution manually. So if it's an RMD and it's occurring after age 72, we're going to pay the taxes out of the RMD. But if you and the way you can manually take a distribution, so let's say from 42 until 50, this account is growing, and then at age 50, I want to roll it over, or no, not roll it over, because then it would be no tax impact. But I want to just take a distribution out of it. Of course, this is going to trigger early withdrawal penalty as well. But for the conversation, if I put a number in here that is, I don't know what the balance is going to be in this year, but whatever. If what I'm pulling out, oh, sorry, I modeled that wrong. If it's a distribution, it needs to be a minus contribution, negative contribution. So now I'm pulling that money out, but I didn't have enough money to pay the taxes. So in that case, the taxes are going to come out of cash flow if it exists, and if money's not available in cash flow, then it's going to come out of whatever the prioritized account is. So annually taxed account, depending on the drawdown the withdrawal order, it's going to come out of that account. So I hope I answered the question. As long as the taxes can be paid from the distribution, they will be paid from it. It happens in one transaction, the money goes into the default account, unless you manually indicated a distribution and the money, there's not enough to pay the taxes, then the taxes will come from someplace else.
Nice. So here we go. A couple things just to kind of, as I'm watching the chat. One, Rick said, yes, that's helpful. Thank you. A couple of folks recognize that, man, we're in some deep water. So, which is great that we have a very diverse set of financial literacy here. Couple of things kind of clarifying.
More basic questions.
Well, yeah. So I think one of the things is, some of this is like, if I'm just getting started in this, and I'm going to kind of combine two conversations that are happening at the moment. But one is, I'm just trying to get started. So I really just need to enter some of my first basic stuff.
Yeah.
And then I think there's still a little confusion on terms around inflation, around the real inflation rate, nominal rate. So maybe there's some questions there that we may kind of, as you're building this out, I'm going to weave some of those questions more specifically into that. As you're modeling that out, I'll weave a few of those questions into, like, let's get some granularity on what we're saying with inflation rate versus real money, nominal, today's dollars, future dollars. I think there's a lot of terms that are getting interchanged, and at some point, maybe we just, this also reminds me, we should probably come out with a glossary of terms. I think there is one in the product somewhere, but making sure that we're all using the same dictionary and vocabulary is a really good really good one. So,
and what I should probably do, and I'll try to be more conscious of this, when I bring up a term, I'll try to define it right away, because even in the financial community, sometimes people use the same term but in different ways. So I'll clarify, and you know what? And sometimes I might get myself confused and use the wrong term. So I'll try to be as clear as possible.
Perfect. But yeah, so give us a little bit of just like, we've talked, there's been some good questions about specific accounts. And so maybe just as somebody is like just jumping into OnTrajectory, and there were a couple of questions even earlier on some account types, or like, how do I model let's figure out. I'm trying to pull one of these other questions into, as you're onboarding somebody just to the basics of it, and you want to set up maybe a traditional retirement account, but also a Roth retirement account, and give us a little bit of context as you're setting it up. What's the difference between those two in the model?
Okay.
Because there were a couple of questions about how does it look on a Roth versus a traditional.
Sure. So I'm going to delete some of these things that I created just to keep this as a very clean conversation, and one where someone just coming into the tool will recognize the situation. So when you come in, we set up base income based on however you answered that question about your pre-tax salary. We make a broad assumption about Social Security. Please go check ssa.gov because they've got your correct information. We don't. We make an assumption about your expenses, which is based on how much you told us you saved each month. So you said, I save $300 per month and I know my income. So now I know your expenses. I just did the math, right? And then we predict just I think 15% decline in expenses in retirement. Obviously, this all needs to be looked at, but that's the basic assumptions. And then we set up your default account, which is, again, just the default place where, let me fix all this here. Oops. Back to retirement. There we go. Okay. Again, this is just the default place where money goes if you haven't said for it to go in some other account. So let's add some other accounts. We're asking about a traditional retirement account. Let's use so we choose add item. And here's 401k, 403b, TSB. They all behave more or less about the same. They have different contribution limits. They have some other fine things that for the most part doesn't much matter. This is a tax deferred account. So the contributions that are going in, they go in pre-tax. And with this account type, you can put employer contributions as well. And we also need to associate a 401k with a particular income stream, because we're only going to make contributions to that 401k while that income stream is active. So that's how you set up a basic retirement account. Not too difficult, but something that is usually helpful for folks is when you're setting up a retirement account or a couple of other accounts. It's usually helpful, as I mentioned earlier, to create multiple age ranges. So let's say from 42 until retirement, I'm putting $1,000 contribution. After retirement, I'm not, so I'm just going to remove that. And by doing this, it gives me the ability to set growth expectations differently, because again, folks will often move into more conservative investments during retirement. So if I put the account in with 2 ranges, it just gives me the ability now to set different characteristics on the account. Now versus a Roth. So setting up a Roth account is very similar. The only difference is, where's an IRA, traditional Roth? The difference is that my contributions to a Roth account are going to be post-tax. And OnTrajectory does all this automatically, but what you'll, and the way you know that this is occurring, Roths get a special tax designation called Roth. And the reason is because the way Roths behave changes over time. If you create a Roth account and you're contributing to it pre-tax, and then for whatever reason you need to pull money out, you can pull your contributions out and with no tax impact. If you pull out your gains before 59 and before 60, then your gains are going to get taxed and you're going to get an early withdrawal penalty. If you pull the money out after 60, there's no taxes at all. So sometimes it's tax exempt, sometimes it's tax gains only. It changes. So that's why we've got this special designator. Advice on should you open a traditional versus a Roth account? I cannot answer for you. I should also state this very clearly. I am not a financial advisor. I am a software engineer who built a tool to help people see the impact of their financial decisions over their lives. We don't give advice in any way. So please, talk to your professional. What I'm describing to you is how these things work from a tax perspective. So just in general, when you're a Roth is generally speaking a good idea when you're in a situation where your taxes, you're not paying a lot of income tax. So you're putting the money in at a low income tax after tax, but your income taxes are low, and then you're pulling it out. It's growing tax free, and you're pulling it out tax free, which is different than a traditional account where you're putting your money in pre-tax. So if you've got a high income tax rate, you're putting your money in pre-tax, and then you're paying taxes on it when you pull it out. So when you're in retirement or in a period of your life where you don't have a lot of income, when you pull the money out, you don't pay a lot of taxes on it because you're not paying high income tax rate. Those are just general perspectives. I'm not giving advice, but that's how they work.
No, that's helpful. And it's good to kind of see, especially like, I mean, some people come in and they're playing around, right? Like they're just, hey, I'm experimenting. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of, if you need to get back to like, this is my actual information. Like I've been playing around. I think it's a good tool. Now I actually want to get back to my real deal.
Okay.
You just showed how you started back to zero a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Obviously you can do it manually, but what I typically recommend is just, create a new scenario. So go over here to the scenario dropdown, choose new scenario, and this is going to just take you right through the same 4 questions that you initially answered. Now, but unlike when you first joined OnTrajectory, where we actually force you to answer the questions, you can skip it. So if you want to skip it, you can skip it, and you'll just go in, like everything will be 0. Or you can go through the 4 questions again. So I'm born in 1980. I make $50,000 per year pre-tax. I saved $50,000. I make $50,000, and let's say I save $1,000. I'm generally a good saver. Then you sort of go back into the baseline, and then you can start all over. Now, if you have started a new scenario and you're like, oh man, I messed up, I just want to start again, you also have the option to go to Tools and Settings, Advanced Settings, and just rerun the setup wizard. So you can do that as well.
Perfect. Okay, so here's a question then. What about, how do you model maybe a future tax rate change, specifically maybe you're moving from married to single?
Sure.
How do you model something like that where you go, oh, this is
single to married? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So again, this is where age ranges are your friend. This is a really, really key part of OnTrajectory. It's a big differentiator for us that you can have these different changes in your life, which is true, right? Things change in life. Now, taxes are managed by default. Taxes are managed centrally. And we attach it, just for convenience sake, we attach your income tax and gains tax rates to your default account. Why do we do that? Because your default account has to span from your start age until your end age. We don't let you have a period of time where we don't know where to put the money. So we force the default account to span your entire life. Every other account can have whatever age range, beginning and ends they want, but not your default account. So since this one has to span your entire trajectory, it's a convenient place to put tax information. So how do we model moving someplace, changing my status, et cetera, et cetera? Sorry, I'm taking a note for myself to potentially discuss something later.
These are good questions.
Right.
Like this is, we certainly are grateful for, some of these questions. Oh yeah, we definitely get a chance to unpack how that would work. Easy.
Alrighty, so let's do this. So by default, again, this is the basic setting. Taxes are set manually. So this allows you to, I know what my effective tax rate is. Maybe I look at last year or last 2 years returns, and I know that, after my tax refund, I generally pay, let's say 15% is my effective tax rate. That's the easiest way to do taxes. That's the default way that we do taxes. But I know that I'm, in retirement, generally speaking, tax rates are much less because your income is less. So let's say in retirement, I'm planning on 10%. So that's an example right there of just the tax rates changing. But we were talking about, hey, I'm moving to a tax-free state. Like maybe I'm going from California to Florida. Although, well, anyway. So let's just change that. So a new age range. At age 50, I'm moving to Nevada. I'm going to have lower taxes. I'm going to live there until retirement. And I want to put a 12% tax rate for that period. Okay, so that's manually how to do it. Different tax rates. And again, we set these on the default account, but this is the tax rate that's going to be applied to income and to gains. Now, I'm sure people are like, oh, but gains are taxed at a different rate. Absolutely, they are. So when we first began OnTrajectory, we had it real simple. We just had one effective tax rate. Like, again, I look at my tax return, I see what I paid in taxes for the year, I'm just going to use that. But obviously, for people that are more in tune with their tax situation, they want to use whatever the correct gains rate is and have their income taxed at a different rate. You can do it manually, as you see here, 20% and 15%. Or you can use our automatic tax calculation. And this is our newest feature from a tax perspective. So the point is that we will calculate it into the future, but when you do your taxes in TurboTax, you're answering hundreds of questions. We are not asking you hundreds of questions. We're making some very broad assumptions. So we do prompt this when you switch to automatic. We say OnTrajectory is not tax advising software. We're doing our best, but we do give you all the levers that you need to hone in. So if you say I accept, I'm going to use automatic taxes. And what you can do here is if you're using automatic taxes and you're in a high tax state, you can say, okay, I'm going to automatically calculate my federal taxes. I'm going to automatically calculate my gains taxes, and I'm in a state where it's 5%. So now we're going to automatically calculate every year into the future your taxes based on those criteria. This is also done at an age range. So if I say, from 42 to 50, I want to do auto. From 50 to 51, 51 to 67, I want to do auto. But for retirement, because I'm just unsure of things, I want to be conservative and put 10% there. You can do it that way. Now, how do I know what taxes what the system is calculating? Go to your output data and you'll see two columns, one for your income tax, one for your gains tax, and you can see what those calculations are year over year. So you can see them here in these columns. And again, if you're in tune with your tax situation, it's very helpful to go back and say, is this correct? And if it's not, then you can tweak it. So I say, oh, you know what? That's higher than what I actually end up paying because I've got deductions, I've got 4 kids, I've got a home, I got lots of juicy deductions. I actually, in the end, I only end up, my state burden is really only about 2% for my number. I don't know if I just went down a rabbit hole or not. I tried to keep that simple and concise. So ask more questions in the chat if you need it.
Yeah, I think the crux of that, I think what's helpful there, at least from what I understand from the question, is when you have a tax rate change, whether that's you were married filing jointly, now you're single, or you change even the way you're doing that, you're able to create age ranges where that's happening.
Correct.
and then put some specific assumptions. And I think that, we've heard from a few folks, hey, this is a pretty helpful overview of just generalized tax settings, which is good. So yeah, Mary says, thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks, Mary.
So let me ask you another one. Trying to understand why OnTrajectory contains the ability to adjust anticipated capital gains tax rate. This is following on some of the tax rate, which I would have assumed simply default 0 or to 15, et cetera, based on current capital gains tax rate. So this person is asking, I want to be accurate, but if I leave the capital gains tax field blank, will OnTrajectory automatically calculate, or must I enter a number?
It will automatically calculate. So we can
Perfect.
see here 15% being calculated, 0 in this year, based on current tax rules. So if there are changes in the future, we'll adopt those new rules as well. And I think, see that I don't want to make a mistake here. I think, yeah, okay. So you can see we do show the current, these aren't, yeah. So here's the US income tax brackets, what they are for single, this person's single. And here are the, I'm gonna have to, why that 10% showed up in that. Oh, I gotta check on something. Anyway, you can see where the rates are there.
Perfect. So that's, yeah. So there's, a lot of questions around tax, and how to make sure you're kind of aware of it, what's being modeled. Just, I think one of the important things too is recognizing that when you view that output data, you can get a lot of granular detail on what assumptions are being in there. So if there's some questions like that, good opportunity for you to just jump in and take a look on that.
Yeah, and on that, obviously this output data can be extremely overwhelming. There's a lot of information here. I made a note to myself. I was wondering why 10% was being shown as a gains rate here. And it's because I left this set at just the overall 10%. The very basic. That's why that was happening. But in any case, back to the output data. We do have a guide here that takes you through literally every column of every table. And tells you exactly what it is, and we even tell you how in the grand total exactly how the totals are being calculated.
Nice. All right, so I got a question kind of to jump in from that. How does the variable spending approach work?
Sure.
Is it a simple calculation, kind of shorthand, or when you're changing it, does it impact the other data?
So it works by a couple of different choices here. So so let's say in retirement, everyone has probably heard of the 4% rule, but a lot of folks will interpret it differently. So the definition, so the 4% rule comes from a study called the Trinity study. In that study, the way they do the 4% rule is when you begin spending 4%, it looks at your assets and it takes 4% of them, and then that's what it spends. And then every year after that, it's adjusting for inflation and spending adjusted for inflation. So when you look at that in OnTrajectory, what you're going to see is a certain spending amount being designated, and then that same amount recurring because it's growing with inflation, and we're showing you it in today's dollars. So it's like a plus and minus of the same amount. So you're going to see that whatever that when you engage the 4% rule. So in this case, at retirement, 4%. So the spending is going to be consistent. We also have something called 4% percent variable. So again, this is a approach where we are basing the spending on a percentage, but we're going to truly vary that amount every year. So we're going to relook at your assets, and we're going to calculate a new amount of spending based on where your assets are. Why this is helpful is that you could put into the future certain big expenses that you're planning to have, a trip around the world, or
a boat,
or kids' medical school, I don't know, whatever, that is going to change your assets dramatically. So then we'll recalculate what you're allowed to spend based on those assets changing, or maybe assets being added. Maybe I'm always wary of using these examples, but a life insurance or maybe an inheritance, and you want to change your spending based on that new asset coming into your life. If you choose 4% variable, it will recalculate that 4% based on the changes of your assets. So,
yeah, I think that's interesting, because one of the comments in the chat around kind of a big fear is that you end up forgetting something that significantly impacts your cash flow, right? Yeah. There is like things like life insurance, payouts and things, and so modeling some of that stuff, creates some challenges to make sure you get everything entered or assumed.
And from a visibility perspective, it's like, okay, it's 4%, but like, can I really live on 4%? What does that 4% represent in the future? You can really easily visualize this by clicking on Analyze and View and coming down to Show Spending. And that's going to show you how much you're actually spending, or how much we're assuming you're spending each year. And that's overlaid on top of your trajectory. Obviously, it's a little bit busy to look at. We don't have it turned on by default, but you can toggle that on and off and easily see that spending.
I know there are a handful of questions in here that are still to be answered. I'm gonna see real quick if we can. There's a somewhat complicated question from Brian around Monte Carlo simulation. So I'm gonna hold that one, Tyson. We can kind of maybe take a look at it, and we can even do some follow up with this group later. So, but I think two maybe we can hit. One quick, is there a way to make help features more context sensitive? I think the question is, related to, my scenario, certain things. So that's one. And then I got a new user question from Scott around, hey, can you discuss optimization of distribution broadly, and how, what customization, how customizable that is?
Okay. Yeah. So help is, in some cases, we do have some context sensitive help, but you might not be aware of it. So for example, if you hover over spending type, there's a learn more button, and it will take you exactly to spending type, percent, variable, all this whole discussion that we just had, right? So there is some of this around. You just have to, what did I just do? I just closed my window. All right. That was dumb. All right, we're back. So these tooltips, many of the tooltips on these columns all have a learn more. So if I want to do tax stuff, there it is. In it, and then also what we have when you click on an item. Let me add a item here. I just saw that in the chat. People are looking at the icons on my desktop. Yeah, I'm a gamer.
Hey, there's a lot of modeling and planning that goes into some of that. So
that's very true. You see these eyes. So these eyes indicate that it's context sensitive and that there's a learn more under it. We had the eyes all out here at one point, but it just cluttered the interface so much. So anytime where you see an eye, there is a learn more. So I can go to Roth conversions, I can go to goals, I can go to rollovers and learn more from a help perspective. Yeah, I think that answers the question. So, but we are constantly trying to add more of these learn mores, but there are a good number of them around. And what was the other question? I'm sorry, Oh, it was about
Sorry,
draw-
this.
Yeah. So
Yep.
if we go to more and we go to optimize drawdowns, we have a default order that we take funds from. And I will mention this for my older users, not older age, people that have been using OT for a while. We used to, by default, have drawdown from default account first. That was enabled. That was the way that we drew down. And then all other drawdowns were based on the end age of an account, which we completely scrapped because it was too manual and it wasn't smart enough to help people. So people that have joined within the past year or two, this is not enabled by default. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the account types, and we have a default drawdown order, which I assume, let me reset. Yeah, this is the default. So we're going to take from annually taxed accounts first, then from tax exempt accounts, then from tax deferred accounts that are not that don't have early withdrawal penalties, then from retirement Roth accounts without early withdrawal penalties, meaning if you've got contributions available and you need the money, we'll take it from there. Then we'll take it from retirement non-Roth accounts without an early withdrawal penalty. Then we'll take it from your Roth contributions. Then we'll take it from a Roth, that retirement account with. So the last place that we're ever going to try to take money from is from a retirement account that triggers an early withdrawal penalty. Obviously, that's exactly what you would do, right? You would exhaust everything else before you would tap this account. So this is the default order. Now there are some situations. I know we've got 1 minute. There's some situations, depending on how much money you have in different accounts, where it might make sense to take it from a tax exempt account first before an annually taxed account or a tax deferred account and tap your gains, blah, 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 blah. So what you can do is run auto optimize. And what this is going to do is it's going to run through 50 different scenarios where it tries to take from different places first, and then look at your end number and see if your end number went up. And if it did go up, it's going to recommend that as the new drawdown strategy. And so in most cases, default is correct, but that's how you do that. I'm going to say we are going to do this monthly. Second Saturday of every month, we're going to do one of these. We're going to record all of them. We're going to chop them up and make little video FAQs. Again, thank you, everyone, for supporting OnTrajectory. I created the tool literally for myself, and I love that other people find it useful. So thank you for joining. Have an awesome Saturday.
Yeah, I think, and man, I'll just say, like, listening to folks, there are some questions on beginner questions. There's some super advanced questions. So we'll capture all that stuff. And like Tyson said, we'll kind of
post-workshop newsletter where we answer any of the questions that didn't get answered.
Yep.
Or you can join next month and ask again. All right, guys. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.